And our guest speaker today is Dr. Susan Schneider, who has many years of experience in climate change work, including behavior change projects. She's also did sustainability work for UC Berkeley and AASHE, which she might be able to explain what that is, and co-authored 2 chapters in its recent guidebook, Making Shift Happen, Designing for Successful Environmental Change. Her award-winning trade book, The Science of Consequences, covers basic learning principles, their role in nature-nurture relations, and their broad range of applications, including sustainability. She's also on the Western Michigan's Tools of Change landmark peer review channel for climate change, and she's also a faculty member there. But this ties in directly, I think, with the topic for today, which is tools of change. So, Susan, it's your time now. Thank you.
Thank you, Nikki, and I will share my screen. Okay. Yes, I'm also on the Western Climate Change Working Group. So the most important contributor to fighting the climate crisis is policy. I'm not going to be focusing on that today. Instead, when you get community sustainability projects going, you're not just influencing one person at a time to go green, you're having whole organizations go green. So it really can have a significant effect on greenhouse gas emissions, and there's a number of side benefits. So this is the kind of level that we're talking about. Side benefits include people seeing that their local school or their neighborhood, etc., is actually making progress with the kinds of changes we need. I'll have a slide on that in a second, which helps to get people feeling less like this is hopeless. That's something we find in the behavioral sciences. It's a real barrier for climate action. People feel like, oh my goodness, it's such a huge problem. There's nothing we can do, and I don't want to think about it. And when they get involved in these community projects, not only are the projects good in themselves, but people see that, yes, we can make a difference working together. And then hopefully it generalizes to other areas of their lives. And of course, hopefully influences how they vote with this upcoming election in mind. This is an area where behavioral scientists have a significant impact because most of the time there is some kind of behavioral component. And in fact, my own area is one of many areas in the behavioral sciences that is very helpful in getting these projects to be successful. The type of targets we're looking at here is not limited to the ones on this slide, but this covers a broad range, I think, to give you the idea. And you can see how behavior is part of all of these. By the way, I trust everyone on this call, and thank you for being here, is aware that gas stoves are problematic not only for their carbon footprint and for using fossil fuels, which we need to stop using, but because of the harmful air pollution they cause inside people's houses, even when they're turned off quite frequently. And I want to mention that I have a sensor, which was not that expensive actually, which I'm glad to lend to anyone. If you know of someone who's got a gas stove, who's been resistant to switching over to electric so that they can measure the volatile organics and the particulates themselves with the sensor, and that tends to have more power in getting people to electrify. Leaf blowers, boy, we managed without leaf blowers when I was a kid. We had something called rakes. Yeah. And I could tell you this is a big issue because leaf blowers and fossil fuel-based mowers have a really big carbon footprint. They're not efficient. They spew out a lot of carbon and air pollution. Thank goodness there are electric leaf blowers, which I do see some people using in Kalamazoo, if you got to use those things. This is something now that Western is doing a lot with, partly because of my colleague in the psychology department, Kate Martini, someone that some of you may know. This was part of her master's and doctoral projects, in fact, at Western, and she's now on the faculty. And locally, she was also able to get composting going and recycling, separation, and reduction of food waste at the Arcadia Entertainment Center downtown. Yeah, it might be interesting to have her give a talk on Fridays for Future about that. Okay, this is something else I do. I try and do all of these because I try and be a role model, right? Natives are fun too because they're good for biodiversity. You get more birds and butterflies and pollinators, and there's less mowing. And we have the Wild Ones chapter locally that can help with that. Um, I've been a commuter cyclist, boy, since I was in high school, whenever I could be. I have yet to try an e-bike, but did anyone else see the Thursday issue of the Gazette, where there was an article about just buying an add-on that was not that expensive, $400, okay, but still compared to buying an e-bike, it was cheaper, where you can take it on or off your bike to help get up these mean hills we have in Kalamazoo, which so far I can still handle with my regular bike, but I'm getting to the point where I'm thinking about that, you know? So it's really great to see actually around the world e-bikes taken off and really helping cut greenhouse gas emissions. And of course, regular bikes, there's been long-standing benefits to those. Okay, reducing flying, important, big carbon footprint there. It's just like Crystal said when she talked about green hydrogen in her Fridays for Future talk a couple years ago. Yeah, it's just not something that we're at yet for green aviation. Yeah, it's going to be a number of years. Likewise for battery power there. So, and then finally, more plant-based diets. For many years, I've been mainly vegan. I do still do sustainable seafood. And when I give these kinds of talks, I'm always careful to share that cutting back on beef is one of the most important things people can do who still eat beef, according to the research that I've seen. And it doesn't mean you have to give it up entirely. And chicken is actually pretty low carbon from the analyses I've seen anyway. So it doesn't mean you have to, that everyone has to go vegan, right? Uh, in fact, I was at a talk recently where a gentleman, was very on board with climate action and tried to live sustainability, but was a big beef lover. And I mentioned the Impossible Burger. He doesn't like the Impossible Burger. Oh my gosh, how can people not like the Impossible Burger? Anyway, it does have a lower carbon footprint and it does help. Uh, and there's all kinds of very successful projects out there, not just in our country, but around the world, to get these kinds of sustainable behavior patterns in organizations of all kinds. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. What we should be doing, I think, is taking these proven successes, all very data-based, and then scaling them up. So implementing them wherever we can. Many of them are not even very expensive, and then really growing the climate movement that way. So kind of from the bottom up as well as from the top down with the policy work. And I was really pleased, this is so timely, just last week, this very highly regarded nonprofit, the World Resources Institute, published a major report on how these sorts of behavioral science projects, these sort of, green behavior projects at the community level were very underutilized. Again, not just in the US, but around the world. I'm going to show you another slide with part of the data. And it's really been a missed opportunity because these can have a substantial impact on greenhouse gas emissions. When it comes down to it, and there's been studies on this, most greenhouse gas emissions ultimately are due to consumers in some fashion or other. So getting these kinds of changes going can really help with the challenge. And here is a screenshot of one of the tables in that report where they looked at 20 countries and did they have any policies in those areas to try and encourage people like to fly less, for this example here, to use public transit more, etc. And you can see, boy, with flying, and in this case, no one's doing it. It doesn't mean that there aren't any projects at all. And the next slide is going to show you one, actually. But at a national level, we're not doing it. And the climate crisis is not going away, folks. This is something we could be doing. On the other hand, almost all of these 20 countries do have projects to encourage people to buy EVs or to use public transit. In the last one, though, at the bottom there, what about encouraging bicycles, including infrastructure and, social marketing campaigns and things like that? And almost none of them are. Thank goodness the US in that case is the one where there is a green dot indicating that we do have some programs, but real missed opportunity there. And again, they've got a lot more data in there. For anyone who's interested, that's the website. So where do you find out about these community successes? Obviously, one place is the academic literature. I can tell you, though, that many of these are not written up for academic journals. It's an extra step there. These things are created and run by municipalities or think tanks or businesses, that are trying to go green. And then there may be an internal report, or if you go to conferences like I do, you might see a report in a conference, but they don't get into the academic literature. So one place you can find these is the Tools of Change website, which has been around since around the turn of the millennium, so about 25 years now. And it includes all the information you need to replicate these sorts of initiatives, and they're all data-based, and there's hyperlinks, and there's resources, and there's samples of whatever materials were used, and yeah, just everything you can think of. It's a wonderful, wonderful resource. It says case studies there. It's actually also experiments and quasi-experiments, and again, they're all data-based. And I am pleased to say that for about 3 years now, I have served, as Nikki mentioned, on the Landmark Designation Committee for Climate Change. In fact, I'm working on the current batch of case studies right now that'll come out later this year. And you can see that there's a planning guide up in the menu on the left there, which is very useful for how do you choose what projects are likely to actually gain traction and work in your community, for your business, for your organization, for your government, for your school, whatever, right? And is it likely to have an impact, right? And there's ways of doing that that have been well studied that I think are summarized well. And I'm not going to talk about that at all because I want to focus on examples of things we could do right here in Kalamazoo. And here's one actually, because these don't have to be at the national or the state level. These can be at a very small local level. And this is one of the few programs I've ever heard of to reduce flying, and it was in Sweden, and it is in the Tools of Change website if you look it up. Here's one that we have had in Kalamazoo. Yay! And I think some of you on this call have actually participated with the Solarize initiative. I know it's in the US across America, like it says there for the case study. I would imagine it's in other countries too. At any rate, it's a neighborhood level intervention where people invite other people they know who are interested in getting solar, and they have solar themselves so they can answer questions, and you work out a group deal with one of the local solar companies that does installations so that everyone who comes to the workshop not only learns about solar and the advantages, but gets some kind of special deal. They get like a certain % off the normal price because it's a group, so it's good for the installer too, right? And these have been very successful. And from the case study on the Tools of Change website, here's part of the data section where you can see the number of megawatts saved because the Solarize program induced people to get solar on their rooftops, and it's quite substantial. And we do that locally already, which is wonderful. Okay, here's another category I could talk about extensively because when I co-founded and co-chaired a climate action coalition in the Central Valley of California, this is one that we did ourselves, and partly because we have a big air pollution problem there. And so working with schools, the idea was get parents who are dropping off and picking up kids not to sit there idling while they're waiting for their turn to drop off their kid, right? You don't need to idle more than 10 seconds if you have an internal combustion engine vehicle. The manufacturers are in agreement on that, as well as independent science. Um, and it's a real easy behavior. You just turn the key, you save money, you save on pollution, and you save on the carbon footprint. And so it's a win-win-win, and it's so much better for kids' health. I mean, in Stockton, where I lived for 12 years, we have an asthma epidemic because it's a valley and there's a lot of air pollution. And these pickup and drop-off sites, you take the data there, the level of air pollution with the particulates and ozone and things like that can be really significant. And so there's all kinds of successful projects helping to get people to idle less, particularly at schools. The one I was involved with personally that I brought to Stockton in California was through the Idle Free California nonprofit. And I helped implement that. And if you know of any schools here interested in an idling project, I can help with that. And in fact, I have been serving on the board now of that organization, that nonprofit, which is now renamed as Green Driving America, because they do other things besides idling. But the case that we don't have a case study on that on Tools of Change, though. But there is one for one of the Canadian idling initiatives called Turn It Off. And that's been quite successful. And like all of the case studies, it's long and detailed and includes all of these segments. And I'm going to end by showing you these fleshed out for a different example. But so there's a sample resource that was used for the Turn It Off initiative there on the bottom right there, the sign. And right, yeah, so background, and then what are the barriers, and then how do you address those barriers? Yeah, why are people idling when they don't need to, right? And then how do you address that? And then financing, a very important element there. These programs often do have some cost, even if it may not be much. And then right, measurement, results, people you can contact for help if you decide to implement this, and then helpful notes. And in this case, I've chosen from the results section some examples. The main methods used here were signs and commitment, getting people to sign pledges. Okay, like you hand them like a leaflet there where it says, here's why you don't need to idle, and would you agree to commit not to idle, and then people sign it, and it's amazing what a difference that makes. A lot of research on this in a lot of different areas. When people sign a pledge, people do tend to live up to it, and you can see idling incidence refers to like the number of people who idle more than 10 seconds, and then idling duration obviously is self-explanatory, how long for the people who were. And right, 78% cut. I mean, that's really substantial. And hopefully people think of themselves then as, people who care about environmental issues and are trying to do the right thing, and it will generalize to other areas. Okay, for schools, this schools project is actually part of a larger project that has its own case study. I'm focusing on schools here because this is the kind of thing, again, we could do in our local schools in Kalamazoo. And this was not expensive. Public recognition for when you cut energy, things like, Energy Star status, that's inexpensive. Taking advantage of school rivalries, the teams where they had faculty, students, and staff looking for savings. This is all not expensive. And they really had significant financial savings, as you can see, that went not into fossil fuels like for heating and electricity, but into school programs. And here's the percentage of savings compared to the baseline year over 9 years of the program. They reached an asymptote, meaning about as high as they could get, where it was in the mid-30s, but very reliably over the years. This is from the Tools of Change website. Again, it's got the data, it's got everything you need to know, or close to everything you need to know to do this in your own school district. It's just a matter of getting enough people in positions of power at the school on board, like a teacher, the principal. Yeah. Okay, I'm not going to talk in detail about this one. This is for local governments to do, a way to get people following up more when they get these energy audits that like consumers will do for free, right? And there's a lot of programs like that. This one you can see enrollment rates doubled. They got a big increase in the number of upgrades. I'm mentioning this one mainly, okay, so this is a whole case study, right, if you're interested. I'm mentioning this one mainly because this is the kind of thing the KCCC could do, and that in fact we were working on, Tom Hackley and I were, in the projects committee for KCCC, and that's the influence that it has when you've got a thermal imaging camera, like in the winter, and you can see so vividly how heat is escaping out of your windows and your cracks around your windows and your doorways and things like that, that you can address with simple, inexpensive approaches like weather stripping, right? And we know from the research that even people who get these energy audits, well, it's numbers on a sheet or on a computer, right? It doesn't have the impact that these visual images do when you've got a thermal imaging camera. So it's really worthwhile to add that. And we were looking into making that part of the Library of Things at the Kalamazoo Public Library. And then they had a series of thefts from their Library of Things, and that all fell apart. I don't know. I hope they've got a solution for that now. But yeah, there's small devices you can use in addition to the whole thermal imaging cameras, which are kind of expensive, that will also have this kind of impact where people actually follow up much more. And in fact, here is a topic resource, so not a case study in this case, just a topic resource summarizing that study I just showed you. And in addition, there is a full case study with all those, you know, uh, areas fleshed out and showing the data and all with one of these programs from Medicine Hat, Canada, that again has a lot more information. And we could certainly do that. Okay, reducing food waste. This is something I know about partly because of being on this committee for Tools of Change, which is pro bono, by the way, that I do. I should have mentioned that. Yeah, and there's a number of initiatives to reduce food waste. Big problem. Probably everyone on this Zoom already knows that. Really quite significant at all levels in the US. And methane that gets produced from food waste is a big greenhouse gas, right? So reducing food waste is very helpful with addressing the climate crisis. Plus, it's just good in itself. And again, you save money, etc., right? So there's a number of approaches. This is one. For those who are interested, there's quite a few others. We could get one of these going. But what I really want to focus on here, and I'm going to go into detail now, is the World Resources Institute's Cool Food Initiative, which has now been around for a number of years. And this is a full case study. There's a lot of data, and this is something we could do right here in Kalamazoo. The World Resources Institute, which I showed you that report in the beginning of this talk, is a very highly regarded nonprofit that works globally on things like climate change. And they started this initiative to try and encourage food providers as well as the public to go more plant-based, not having to give up meat entirely or anything like that, just to increase the proportion of plant-based foods in the diet for the United States. And tools used on the left there at the bottom, there we go, you could see over there, right? That would be behavioral science tools, things like feedback and incentives and social norms, get a new social norm going, right? Okay. And then more of those getting a commitment again. Prompts would be things like signs, using mass media. Okay, and then some background. And on the left, they've got a quick summary there. So cutting to the chase, this program has reduced per plate emissions by 10%. And they're trying for more, actually. If you see at the bottom next to that, setting objectives, they're trying to get a 25% cut by 2030 relative to the baseline for whatever organization it is. So they're working with all of these organizations, and they started out by doing a very thorough review of the scientific literature and found 89 very useful. Sorry? Okay, found 89 useful experimental studies with all these different venues, and then had those reviewed and rated by all these industry experts from all these different backgrounds, right? Again, they really try to be thorough here at World Resources Institute. They worked with food providers at every stage, from those who didn't have any kind of program for plant-based to those who were already, succeeding in cutting their greenhouse gas emissions substantially. And here's the kinds of actual methods that they used, which our local restaurants could use too, right? Things like, just reducing the amount of meat in the dish and increasing the amount of plants, offer more plant-rich dishes, under placement there, make sure that they're prominent. Presentation, that's really critical. There's been a lot of scientific research showing having an area called vegan, or having a meal at a restaurant or a cafeteria, right? This can be in businesses too, right? If you call it vegan, that tends to be a turnoff for the people you're trying to reach. Similarly with the term vegetarian and plant-based. What you want to do is use fancy, taste bud evoking language like tropical, right? Who doesn't like something that's tropical? So may have a plant-based dish, call it tropical something or other, and people, it's kind of like nudges, for those of you familiar with that, you just change the environment so people get nudged in the direction that's healthier and more environmentally valuable, right? And so just something simple like that. Okay, promotion, all kinds of things that can be done there, offering diners free samples, right? If they haven't tried something and they're a little leery of, something that clearly is mainly plants. And something I think was especially brilliant at the bottom there under people, they had the servers try all of these new plant-rich dishes, right? They trained the chefs and they offered incentives, provide talking points. And again, this was really successful. They developed a logo. This has been around for a while now. This is not a new program. This is a program that's been around for a while. And looking at the barriers and the motivators at the bottom there, how do you address these barriers? And this is how. There's some more barriers that were addressed. They had a playbook for the industry, the food industry, right? The restaurant industry. And then again, involving the staff, encourage staff to mention these options to people. And my outline didn't read at the bottom there. The first city to sign on in the US, a whole city signed on here, was New York City. They've been encouraging all their food service providers, not just commercial restaurants, but like cafeterias and schools and businesses, things like that, to sign on to the pledge. And this has really been very impactful. When they're talking 63 organizations, they're including these huge franchise things, right? That have hundreds of restaurants across the United States. And I know that because one of the examples is right here in Kalamazoo and in Portage, Panera Bread. Panera Bread has signed on to the Cool Food Pledge because their parent company signed on to it. There's others with Panera Bread too, I'm sure, but that's the one that's stuck out for me because I know we have that locally. And 2 billion meals annually is, yeah, obviously substantial. So this is the kind of thing we could expand without too much difficulty, I think, right here in Kalamazoo. Okay, and then, yeah, so I was on the landmark committee, so there's my name at the bottom there. Lessons learned, again, work not just with consumers, but with the food service organizations. Here's their list of websites that can serve as resources. And we can ask our favorite restaurants. I know that some of the local restaurants here that I've eaten at offered to replace meat in the dish with a plant-based alternative like the Impossible Burger or the Beyond Burger. I have taken advantage of that. Just asking other restaurants if they could do that would be helpful. And then, of course, if you can get them to sign on, that would be even more helpful. We can really get the kinds of changes that we need. And I want to say, from what I've seen, people in the US are cutting back on beef, but it's not fast enough, just like what, as most of us know, we're not cutting greenhouse gases fast enough. Okay, I haven't talked much about healthcare institutions or businesses. There's lots of examples. This will serve for both because Bronson, last year or year before, did a Fridays for Future presentation that I saw, and they have a website too, focusing on their sustainability efforts. That's at the bottom of the screen there. And they're doing a lot. I'm sure a lot of other local businesses and healthcare institutes are too. I happen to know about Bronson, so I'm picking them out here to honor them. They got these nice honors. And locally, I know from talking to people who work at Bronson too, they have these good behavioral programs where they have incentives to support people biking to work. I didn't see it on the website, but it was either in the presentation or other people I've talked to at Bronson that they support public transit too, taking the bus in Kalamazoo, for example, and carpooling too, I believe. Some of you may know more about that than I do. But anyway, a number of companies across the US, and I'm sure others in Kalamazoo, have these kinds of programs as well. And this is the kind of thing that we can help propagate, that we can support by, wherever we go for our healthcare, we can ask if they have these kinds of programs and refer them to Bronson for how to do it. And there's a lot of other networks. So Tools of Change is one good website that has a lot of resources totally for free. But all of these networks, including, right, what Nikki mentioned in the intro, ASHE is the Association for the Advancement of Sustainability in Higher Education. That's one I know about because I've done workshops for them when I worked for that nonprofit, Root Solutions, on sustainability. And I just a couple of weeks ago posted a question on their sustainability listserv for the Climate Change Working Group. And Western belongs to this network. I bet K College too does. Almost certainly most colleges and universities in the US do. We have a local Western Michigan Sustainable Business Forum that shares information. I know something about the K-12 education groups too, like Green Schools Alliance. I've actually worked a bit with Green Ninja. And so there's lots of lots of networks sharing information about these community level green projects that we can take advantage of as well. And thank goodness, because they are really having an impact. And for those of you who would like some more information, 2 years ago, Union of Concerned Scientists, a nonprofit, asked me to do a podcast for them on this topic of community level sustainable behavior projects. And so that is freely available if you're interested. And I'm happy to share the PowerPoint. And I could just quickly mention too, I maintain for many years a list of about 50 to 60 of my favorite sustainability books over the last 10 years, which is freely available on my book website. Thank you again for being here and for all you do for climate action. And I'm happy to take questions.
I've had frustrations about trying to lead a township level efforts, and it's been very difficult and frustrating. And I don't want to go into that in depth here, but we have not actually been able to make much concrete progress. And I guess backing up a little from that, what I want to ask is, or state, the focus has to be on finding reasons for people who are not, climate is not there. Maybe they believe in climate change, maybe they could be on, you know, on the spectrum of attitudes towards climate change that we have. Perhaps they're somewhere in the middle on that, but they believe it's happening, but they're not alarmed. And we need to find ways of engaging and motivating people for whom climate is not their number one, or maybe not even in their top 3 or 4 issues. Now, you did address that already, so thank you very much. I heard that. Hard to generalize, and so boy, this is a very vague question. I'm sorry.
But you're right.
Could you enlarge on that a little bit more
Yeah.
with what you have personally maybe found effective in talking to people and giving reasons how they could improve their lives, as opposed to this is good for the world?
Yes, thank you, Mark. You are so right. I can think of 3 examples I can share, and there's a lot of research addressing this in the different areas of sustainability and the barriers. It's part of the barriers, frankly. They will differ depending upon the organization and the particular group of people that you're trying to address, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of nuance here is what I'm trying to say. But I think it's kind of funny in a way, but if you can find something that works, then even if it has nothing to do with climate change, if you get the change you need, that's what matters, right? So for energy efficiency, saving money. Organizations save money, and there's so much data on that now. And as long as the payback period isn't hugely long, then that's a good way that's been successful in selling that, even to people who could care less, right? For cutting back on the fossil fuel-based lawn mowers and the leaf blowers. Believe it or not, places that have been successful in getting bans or limits on those, like believe Washington, D.C. is one. I'd have to check my notes. Something that has worked for the people building up support for those kinds of new regulations has been more the noise. People don't like how noisy those things are, and so they get restrictions, not because of the greenhouse gas emissions, and not even because of the air pollution, but because of the noise. But as long as you get the regulation through, then, why does it matter? Right. That's the thing. And similarly, for the third example I thought of when you were mentioning that, Mark, to get the idling regulations through, to get schools to post the signs. This was something my Climate Action Coalition worked on in Stockton, California. The state was very good about having signs posted by pickup and drop off spots for schools, kind of like the one I showed in this presentation, but with a picture of a student by an exhaust pipe from a school bus, with fumes coming out, and all schools, private, public, they all got these signs to post at those spots. And a lot of schools did not post the signs. Okay, so yeah, this is not a hard behavior to do, right? But they didn't do it. It wasn't a priority, right? So that's one thing we've worked on, getting them to post the signs. And one of the successes that we had, and others had also, we're also working on this, right? Was again, not focusing on climate change. It's a shame that it doesn't motivate more people. We get the urgency, but a lot of people still don't, unfortunately. So in the case of Stockton, California, though, like I said, asthma is a big issue, children's health, and around the world, I think, people recognize more about air pollution, and it's bad for everyone. You get these respiratory problems. Children are especially vulnerable. And so that's how California, that's partly how they really get the regulation through to begin with. And that helped us get more signs posted because more parents were on board with that than were on board with the climate change aspect. And so, yeah, so that kind of approach, yeah, doing a barriers analysis more generally, and then testing strategies for overcoming the barriers and getting enough support so that you can get these changes through. It's a really good question. Thank you, Mark.
Okay, Rick, you're up next.
My question was something I really don't focus on very much, the food waste reduction and composting. Deb has done a little composting. My understanding of composting is you can take your food waste, and if you turn it over, then it's aerated and it does not create methane. If you just bury it, then it creates fungus and stuff like that, and that does make methane. So I hear about food waste reduction and composting. Are there any organizations that try to put those two issues together and get the food waste composted?
Locally, yeah, Western does. Western composts the food waste from the Valley dining area. Again, Kate Martini knows a lot more about this, that professor of psychology I mentioned. And actually, I take my food waste over to the Office for Sustainability on campus because they have a bin in front of that building. Although obviously that's small scale, and this is a small enough group. We could get away with that. The whole city can't do that. It's a small bin, right? There's a number of things you can buy, which I looked into when I moved here, but again, it was just so much easier, and I don't have that much food waste. I have rats, which helps too. Oh my goodness. Pet rats. I recommend pet rats to reduce food waste.
Not outside in your backyard, though.
Yeah, but people do. But ideally, we would move towards, and here's where policy comes in again, right? Municipal composting, which California has because it's mandated, at least if you're over a certain size, and certainly the city of Stockton, where I lived, was. So you have a bin for that, which you combine your yard waste, like if you mowing and branches and things like that, green waste, with your food waste, and they've composted that in California. And I've heard of some places in Michigan that do that. If we could get that going in Kalamazoo, that would be great. Other than that, I think other people on this call may know more about that than I do, and certainly Kate Martini would, because again, she's an expert on that. Who, again, Arcadia Center, she really did so much there and on campus.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Nancy has a question in the chat. Does hydroponic growing of vegetables fall into sustainability planning?
Oh boy. And again, some of you may know more than I do, but I've read pros and cons for that, depending on how it's done. I've read sometimes that it's still a net, carbon emissions. Whether it's better or not than conventional agriculture, not to talk about regenerative agriculture, right, where you're trying to sequester carbon. I mean, there's so many variables there. I've read a bit about it. I am by no means an expert, I'm afraid. Does anyone on the call happen to know more? Yeah, it's a good question.
I mean, I have an opinion about it. It's, I mean, to a certain extent, industrial agriculture is hydroponic because we have to add water and add nutrients because the soil has been degraded so much that it can't hold water or nutrients anymore. So it's kind of hydroponic, but really, realistically, hydroponic is not an energy efficient or carbon efficient way, and it's not something that's scalable to address our food crisis.
I use a small little hydroponic system here that I got through an online thing that I grow lettuce all winter in. So for me, it works. I don't know if it's sustainable. It uses electricity, but it certainly gets me fresh lettuce that I can just pick a leaf or two as I want for my sandwiches or whatever. Um, but as a industry, I'm not sure where it would fall.
You know, there are lots of cities around the country, you know, first in California, but also, you know, Seattle, even Ann Arbor, they have ordinances that require composting. Food waste, it's easy to do yard waste, but food waste is a little more complicated and messy because it's so wet. But I know that developing a municipal system is one of the things that Justin Gish at the city really wants to bring to Kalamazoo is a municipal food waste composting system. So if you have questions about that, you know, reach out to Justin and, you know, ask him where that stands.
Well, I had a general question. It was when you were showing your slides, the sustainable behavior target slide, it struck me that a lot of those activities were actually individual activities. How do we communitize them? Is that a word?
Right.
It is now.
Yeah, you try and get the whole organization to be doing it, right? So it's not just one by one, right? You have a whole system in place to support this kind of, you know, like badges. I'm thinking for encouraging people to carpool for organizations where, yeah, of course, it starts out just with a few, but the company promotes it. And then they have badges if you are part of a carpool. And then people who work in the company see people wearing the badges and they get the memos and it becomes a new social norm. And suddenly, you know, 4 times as many people are doing it. Yeah, so with the power of the organization, and similarly, of course, for a government, you can have policy. For a neighborhood, you can have neighbors doing solarize, right? Or starting a native plant group like we have in the Winchell Neighborhood Association. We now have a native plant group within that organization, and we have signs and word of mouth, and yeah, you get the idea, right? Yeah, there's a number of ways that you can make that happen, and they've been well studied in the scientific literature for a number of years.
Okay, and then another question I had is, you said you ride your bike a lot.
Yeah.
Do you find bike racks everywhere you're going?
I was in one myself when I was a commuter cyclist. It was bad. Yeah. One of my best friends, he's on the Audubon board with me, was recently in a bike accident. Yeah, that was serious. Yeah. Yeah. For Western's climate emergency month semester, okay, spring into action semester in the spring, right? One of the things I organized was a showing of a film about bicycling in the Netherlands called Bicycling Together, or some catchy title like that. Together We Cycle. Yeah, and it talked about how it came about that, you know, young people, old people, rain or shine, you know, it's just a social norm that you bicycle almost everywhere. And this was before e-bikes, but of course the Netherlands is pretty flat, unlike Kalamazoo. So how did that come about? Right. And one thing is that there was enough political support for the infrastructure. So they have not just bike racks, but in the cities, you know, even smaller cities, they have biking garages at key spots, right? Like we have car garages. So the infrastructure is much better and it's a social norm. And so they don't have as many accidents either, I'm sure. I'm not sure if that was in the film or not. But yeah, certainly there's proven ways with the traffic engineers, right, to limit the number of accidents. And we're going in the right direction in Kalamazoo, so that's good.
So, in all of your various different places, how did you get more bike racks put out so that people felt comfortable bicycling somewhere and knowing that they'd be able to do something with the bike? Because here, that does seem to be a problem.
Yeah, yeah. Although the places I bike to, like the Oakwood Plaza, does have a bike rack, a couple of bike racks actually. So that's good. Yeah, if a place I bike to doesn't, I will gently suggest that they might consider getting someone. And of course, at the city level, right, you can lobby the council members, the planning committee, yeah, things like that. And of course, join organizations that are supporting these things. I belong to Mode Shift. I belong to the Bicycling Club in Kalamazoo, and they lobby for these kinds of things.
Okay, well, thank you, Susan. I
Thank you,
found
Susan.
it interesting.